in July, I ended up dropping all smartphone games from my gaming life, including SINoALICE, because I wanted to treat them the way I treat console games and not go halfway into them in order to enjoy their stories and worlds just as much as I do others. I never thought that I'd find a genuine excuse to come back to SINoALICE so soon, but today I'm happy I could because this video is actually sponsored, which not only helps the channel a ton, but is an amazing excuse to make the time to play this game that I wanted to play anyway. On top of that, I'm very happy to be able to show some of what's coming up in the world of SINoALICE for those who are already into the game, or for those who have been looking for a reason to jump in like I was, as this next act, which comes out on October 30th, is something I think will appeal to many of those who enjoy the type of JRPGs I like to talk about on this channel, and also those who want to see a new side of Yoko Taro's fairy tale infused dark fantasy. So today, I'm here to talk about SINoALICE's upcoming third act, The Act of Reality, which I was lucky enough to be able to play around with before release to show you guys what it's all about. This was also my first extended look at SINoALICE in a while, and since The Act of Reality is harder than the first two acts, I also had to play a lot of the game in general to upgrade my equipment to where it needed to be. And since this was my first time playing with it this much since I made my first impressions video on the Japanese version in 2017, I naturally have a lot of thoughts on my extended playthrough this time round. So with all that to cover, here's an introduction to SINoALICE's Act of Reality, what we can expect from it, my thoughts on the new story content it brings, and updated thoughts on this unique JRPG experience for smartphones. SINoALICE launched in the West earlier this year and has slowly had a bunch of content added to it, which means its main story now includes the initial act of Impulse and the full act of Hatred, which gradually introduce new characters to the roster such as the Little Mermaid, Dorothy, and the three little pigs, who I am incredibly curious about. The act of Impulse shows the dark beginnings of the story of fairy tale characters setting off on a murderous journey in order to revive their creator, and the arc of Hatred sees the story continue down a darker and darker path in the same direction. The upcoming Act of Reality features that same darkness but takes a little bit of a left turn. Not into happier story content of course, but into a place where fantasy and reality meet to create a compelling new arc that offers the same idea on a modern and real level to show this story in a new light. The Act of Reality feels like a look at what these characters would have been like in the real world, and offers more story and alternative versions of characters we already know. Instead of these characters being directly pulled from fairy tales, they're actually real people, but with similar themes to what the fairy tale characters went through to create new stories, with the originals just serving more as inspiration. Alice is a high school girl who has had her heart broken by her teacher, the Little Red Riding Hood is a young assassin, Dorothy is a scientist who will do anything for her research, and the Little Mermaid is an office lady who killed her adulterous lover and her boss. Even though their premises are different, the characters' keywords are so clearly tied into each one, with the Little Red Riding Hood's theme of brutality connecting easily to her new story role as an assassin, and Dorothy's curiosity being the perfect fit for her new role as a modern mad scientist. So with these new premises, it's cool to see SINoALICE tackle a different kind of story while also keeping that dark feeling that makes it what it is. And it's the kind of story that will likely appeal to those who like the story of the first two arcs and the characters' original personalities, while also potentially appealing to fans of more modern stories like Persona, as it takes on telling stories based on the real world. The difference between the Act of Reality and the previous two was something I felt as soon as I heard Alice speak in her new chapter. In the first two acts, she speaks with a lower, darker tone that suits the tone of someone about to kill many to revive her author, but in the Act of Reality, like her new premise, it's closer to that of a high school girl with a slightly higher pitch and innocence to it that makes when she calls for her teacher's help sound believable and almost like a whole new Alice. This, along with seeing words like Shinjuku and skyscraper flash on screen, lets this new reality in the world of SINoALICE sink in, and it's from here I went to look at the other girls' stories, who begin with the same type of somewhat more innocent feeling for the most part, at least until we find out more about them as their stories go on. Stories play out the same way the previous arcs would have you expect, with the first and last chapters featuring some additional story and harder boss battles, and the ones in the middle showing a few lines of slowly unraveling story that lead up to an exciting conclusion. My time with the first chapters saw them feel like they had two halves, with the first half often featuring the character experience experiencing disorientation, and then slowly revealing who they were as they began to remember their real-world selves. They usually came with the reveal of some darker things that happened in their pasts. The first two chapters I got most into were the Alice and Little Mermaid ones, and my favorite ultimately ended up being the Little Mermaids. It took her theme of misery from the act of hatred and applied it so well to the real-world setting that had me see the Little Mermaid in a totally new light, having me consider that love of misery aside, if she was the victim in her tragedy or someone who has a habit of falling for the wrong people, and whether she creates her own misery intentionally or just comes to enjoy the feeling in an addictive way to cope. Alice's story also keeps to her theme of madness as she discovers this new world of fighting and enemies that melts away some of her real-world problems, and I can see Red Riding Hood's brutality and Dorothy's curiosity easily being explored as they discover a new kind of world. How fascinated I was by the Little Mermaids gives me high hopes for their stories too, and I'd definitely say the writing had me in by the end of my time with it, with characters feeling more relatable in a way that made some of them more human, and adding that little bit to their stories that added a new fascinating layer that made them even more interesting. It's also probably worth noting that if you know the other acts better than I do, I'm sure you'll get even more out of these stories too, since as I got to know them more, the way everyone's themes tied into this new story became much more obvious. With the way it blends SINoALICE's premise and real-world elements, I'm sure this fresh look at the story's sad and dark themes will be a real treat to fans who love the world, and it's something that helped get me into it. It's something I'm looking forward to going through more when the act comes out officially next week. Gameplay shouldn't be that much of a surprise for those who've spent a decent amount of time in SINoALICE, as it really doesn't shake up that side of things that much, with the main additions being 2 new jobs, the new nightmares you meet on the field, and the new backgrounds which are also based on real-world settings like train stations and alleyways. One of the first things I noticed a difference in when I came into the game was the music too, which I initially thought was going to be softer than SINoALICE's usual fantasy music, as the menu featured a gorgeous Nier-esque guitar track, but that pretty track was completely contrasted by some of the boss battle music that includes a solo heavy metal track, and I wonder if the use of this kind of music was intended to tie in the real-world setting, as it does sound different to the other arcs while still being epic. If it was, I'd say it was done well, and it always got me in the mood to take down a hard enemy. As I mentioned, I only got to varying points of the first chapter of these stories, and that's because of just how hard these new missions were. This act of reality was basically a crash course in SINoALICE for me, bearing in mind that the last mission I played before these sessions was in the second chapter of the Act of Impulse that was rated a 5, whereas these reality missions started around 76, which since most missions go up about 1 difficulty point each, you can imagine is a bit of a jump. This shouldn't be a concern if you finish the Act of Hatred though, which you'll need to do to unlock this story anyway, and at the moment there's a campaign to get 150 Twilight Crystals if you do it before the Act of Reality's launch, so it's a good time to do so. If you do that, these stories pretty much progress perfectly from there and give you the story background to get the most out of the act anyway, so I'm sure regular players will have an easy enough time, and if not, it looks like there'll be event missions out when the act is out to help players grind high enough to play through it smoother than I did, so hopefully it won't take others too long to get into the swing of things. Because this was my background in SINoALICE though, I can't really comment on how these chapters compare in difficulty in detail, but I can say that I did enjoy the challenge they provided after I got better at the game. The new Salaryman enemy's double health bar and high defense was something that was fun to throw as many attacks as possible at in a short time period, and I was also happy to receive the real Ghost Nightmare at the end of one of my rounds that helped me in my time with the story, and there seemed to be a few other nightmares with modern inspiration, with things like Worker and Nurse's hats that had a fun bit of variety of enemies to remind you that you're in the alternative story just like the other acts. I also really like the Alice alternative design that I got to play with that offers a lot in terms of upping individual stats like magic and physical attack and defense that will no doubt be useful against the enemies in these new areas if you spend time mastering the class. There is a Red Riding Hood alternative too that can be earned through the Back Alley Reaper gacha that I didn't have any luck in getting in my 3 gacha tries. Aside from its cool design, it seems to feature a similar kind of stat boost according to what can be found online, and the fact that these two are coming hopefully means we'll see the other alternative designs come to the game soon, as I like the way they look and would love to play through the Act of Reality chapters with these units matching the background aesthetics, along with checking out their character stories, which are great at adding even more depth to the story. From class stories, enemy designs, and the new main story, SINoALICE's Act of Reality combines the darkness of the fantasy library world with realities that are easy for players to understand, and creates a story that I think will appeal to fans of SINoALICE, Yoko Taro's works, and fans of games like Persona or Danganronpa that combines real-world themes and traumas with gameplay. It actually reminds me a lot of a video Yoko Taro did to help support Atlus's Studio Zero project Fantasy, where he encouraged them to reconsider their project as it would take up the space in the RPG market where Nier sits in realistic fantasy. Then he said he would venture into modern realistic games like Persona, and was then told that Persona and this new Studio Zero game are separate titles, at which point he said Nier would definitely die no matter what. I'll link that video below as it's pretty funny. I mention this because this active reality is actually kind of a venture into where I would consider to be the modern realistic part of that chart, with a bit of SINoALICE fantasy in the mix. And since it's something different from his usual stories, I'm impressed to see this new kind executed so well here, and would honestly be happy to see more of his writing in this setting, as I really think the two work well together and it helped show his characters in a new way. So if you like his writing so far and want to see something a little bit different, this active reality is a great way to do that, and all of the other things help make this continuation in the story satisfying to anyone who enjoys SINoALICE and all of Yoko Taro's unique and interesting worlds. After spending many hours with SINoALICE since taking on this sponsorship, I did also just want to give my thoughts on the game as a whole, since I think I know it a whole lot better now than I did when I made my first impressions on it 3 years ago. And I'm sure there are some of you who haven't tried the game at all yet who want to know if it's fun. While this is a sponsored video and therefore I wouldn't call this a review or anything, I do want to stress that all my thoughts in this video are completely honest, including the fact that I really like SINoALICE as a mobile experience. There are some really good smartphone games out of the moment that do open world really well and mostly suit longer play sessions, but the thing I like about SINoALICE is still one of the first things I liked about it when I tried it years ago, and that's how well it provides bite-sized story in a way that makes it good for both long and short sessions. Usually when I'm jumping into smartphone games these days, it's when I'm not home and away from my consoles, and the way SINoALICE is designed by giving a new line of a character's story and 3 waves of enemies that usually only take a couple of minutes to beat lets me have some strategic fun quickly that means I can start and finish a piece of story in every sitting. And with the active reality adding even more content to this game, there's plenty to chip away at in my free time, from the core story, upgrading my weapons to get stronger and to see more weapon stories, and with so much content both permanent and limited, it's nice to have something I can jump into and always have something to play within. Also, since I had to do a few grinding sessions, I finally got to understand the weapon systems a lot better, which by the way, if anyone else is starting out for the first time, I absolutely recommend Para and Noya's training event, as it gives some really great and fully leveled weapons that'll help low level players get a good start in the game. I actually came to consider the weapons more like cards by the end of this training. You can easily consider the SP as mana, and then think of the card in terms of cost and overall effect on the enemy, and whether it fits the right elemental or weapon weakness and is worth costing now or later. And once I thought of it like that, battles became much easier, and in just a couple of dedicated days of play, I could beat battles comfortably until I got to 70 difficulty, where I need to grind more and revive sometimes. But since my first introduction to this system was in Japanese where I didn't understand it well, it's nice to feel like I finally do, and I also appreciate that I was able to get some great weapons by taking the time to learn the game that will help me catch up on story content much quicker. I also really like how the class system lets you use characters almost however you like, since most characters have a job that can suit your style of play. This does depend a little bit on your luck in gachas if you're specific about what you want, with the main thing I wanted being frontline attackers, as I find supporting difficult. And you can get a fair few units just by playing the story, which is nice and makes me feel less compelled to use the gacha, as I can make most battles work with what I already have and what's available to me as I keep playing. At this point, I think the only thing I'd change about SINoALICE is that I would love if it added English voiceover at some point. Sometimes I find myself not knowing whether I should listen to the Japanese or read the singular words coming up on screen during the story's bigger moments, and I think English voiceover would help Western players get the same experience as Japanese ones who have the benefit of both understanding what they're hearing and how it works with what's on screen. But with that being the only thing I'd change, I'm very happy with the way SINoALICE has been brought into the West, and the Japanese voice acting is very good anyway, so it's more something I wish for if the game ever got bigger and had the budget to do so. But ultimately, as I said about the active reality, I really recommend this to fans of Yoko Taro's work, as it's a great way to get a dose of his type of storytelling and weapon ones in a form that's easy to fit into a day and that has enjoyable gameplay. And as long as I keep enjoying leveling up my gear and finding more story, it's something I hope to enjoy for a while, especially until Near Reincarnation comes out. If you want to see if you'll become addicted to it after getting to know it too, you can check out SINoALICE and the Active Reality by using my link in the description to find out where to download the game. Until next time though, I hope you've enjoyed this sneak peek at the Active Reality that I'm grateful to have been able to give, and I hope those who try it enjoy this new act of Yoko Taro's twisted fairy tale world. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know in the comments below if you're going to try the Active Reality, and if you're already playing SINoALICE, what do you think of it? You can like and share this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe to my channel for more JRPG content like this, and ring that bell to get notifications on whenever I post so you don't miss a thing. You can check out more videos here, and you can find me on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, all at JRPG Jungle. Links to those will be in the description below. Thank you again to PokeLabo for sponsoring this video, and until next time, thank you, bye!